What is hiking like in Europe versus the United States of America? So in this video, we're going to talk about the biggest differences that I've noticed while hiking in Europe. In addition to that, we're going to give you some tips on how to make your European thru hike a little bit more enjoyable. I've been lucky enough to do several thousand kilometers in the Alps and across Europe, and so these are some of the things that I've learned along the way. I would say the biggest difference in Europe versus the United States is the lack of public lands. And how that affects the hiker is that you're generally on private property, and that means that camping isn't really allowed. I have made a separate video about camping, and I will link that right now. So most people don't carry camping gear because of that. You generally have to ask for permission to camp. You can camp at some huts or some farms along the way, but camping in general is illegal in Europe. The next big difference is the hiking style. It's a completely different hiking style. In Europe, they do hut to hut, refugio to refugio, town to town. And that is because, like I just said, camping is illegal. And so most people just go from one accommodation to the next. Because of this unique hiking style of not camping and going hut to hut, you really don't need to carry as much gear as you would in, say, the United States of America. A tent isn't really necessary unless you do plan on doing some camping. I did camping on the last hike that I did, and this next hike I'm not going to bring a tent because I don't think it was worth itself in weight. Most of the time I cowboy camp, and if there's inclement weather, I'm just going to stay in a hut. But you don't really need to carry that much gear, so it is a lighter backpack. However, you will see a bunch of European hikers doing much shorter distances in Europe, and they will be carrying an absurdity of weight. It seems like they have one size backpack and that's what they use, and they bring a ton of clothes and stuff like that. Okay, to each their own. Hike your own hike. Back to the whole camping and lands. There's no public lands. So it's always private lands that you're passing through, private farms or reserves or natural parks. And so in these places of private lands, you have to ask for permission to camp. So be sure to do that. Another really big difference is the type of trails. The types of trails in Europe aren't as groomed. They're not as smooth. They are more rough and rugged. In Europe, they're more likely to add something to the rock than they are to take away from the rock. And so they have a lot of via ferratas in Europe. And so that is just like metal cables or stuff like that to give you assistance on getting up the rock face. Whereas in the United States of America, they will remove rocks to make it a smoother trail for you. So what does that really mean? So it's going to be tougher on your body. It's going to be tougher on your knees. It's going to be tougher on your hips. It's going to be tougher on your gear. Your shoes will get used faster because of that. They will wear down quicker. So this is, if you're an East Coast hiker, this is definitely somewhere that will seem like home to you. You will probably shine in Europe. You're not going to meet that many hikers doing thru hikes. Now, every thru hike is different in Europe. Like if you were doing the Camino de Santiago, you would certainly meet a lot of people on that trail. But on your long distance mountain trails, you won't meet so many thru hikers. You may meet a lot of day hikers or section hikers. But the thru hiking community in Europe is different. Even though they have more vacation time in Europe, they don't do long thru hikes in Europe. So don't expect this to be an extremely social event unless you're doing something like the Camino. Another big difference is in Europe, especially in the Alps, there isn't many off days. Every trail system or long trail in the United States of America has its easier sections. And because the way the Alps trails work, they go from hut to hut or town to town or accommodation to accommodation. you're generally doing a lot of elevation, and it's always up and down. You're always doing if you're climbing up to stay at a hut, and then the next day or the day after, you're climbing back down to the valley floor and staying in a village or a small town. So um, there isn't really like, oh, well, this is a really cruisy day, I'm gonna crush miles. The trails aren't built like that. They're rougher, and there's really just not that many flat sections in the Alps. Kind of in connection to the land of private land and farms that you're passing through, there's going to be a lot of livestock. If you're not okay with livestock, cows, big bulls, sheep, being directly on the trail, that's something you need to consider. My other hiking partner, Cracker, did not like cows. He did grow accustomed to them by the end of the trip, but there was definitely some fears that he had amongst them. With the livestock and the cows comes bugs. And so the big thing is ticks. Man, there were a lot of ticks because you're walking through high grasses and stuff like that. Checking for ticks was something you had to do regularly. Which, if you're an East Coast hiker, again, this is something you're used to, and if you're not from the East Coast, you're going to have to get used to it because there are a lot of ticks in Europe. Water. So there is water all over the place in Europe, and it's not common for hikers to purify their water or filter their water. Having the accessibility to water filters in Europe is few and far between. So I didn't really find any filters, so I brought my own. A lot of the places that you'll get to, huts and stuff like that, will have, in whatever language of the country that you're in, will basically say that the water is marked not potable. Um, and, I don't know if it's strategy in order for the huts to sell you more water. Um, but I have a filter, and so I filtered it. So, there would be water from the sinks that were coming up, and it said Klein Trinkenwasser, which means it's not drinking water. But I'm assuming that it's rainwater, so you could drink it. So I just filtered it. So, if you're going to Europe and you need a filter, it's the wrong place to go buy one. Bring your own, or bring your own tablets or stuff like that. Camping gas. You're not going to find gas in the stores that you would think you would find them in. I went into several hiking stores and I never found camping gas. Um, when I got close to Chamonix, they had actual like camping stores like Decathlon, and I was able to find camping gas. It seems that every country has camping gas in different locations, and you may have to look at a livestock store or ask locals. But I had a hard time finding camping gas, and when I was in France, I found a whole different style of camping gas that was not a screw top. It was like a click in gas canister, which I didn't have a stove that worked for that, so it became not really helpful for me. Um, so yeah, something to keep in mind was the lack of camping gas that I was able to find. Maybe you have a different experience. This goes into conjunction with the next thing I want to talk about, and is backpacking meals. Um, there weren't, your Mountain House or any of those type of dehydrated meals. Once again, I did find them in Chamonix, but I did not find them in any other places. I'm sure Decathlon has them, but it wasn't that big of a concern for me. I enjoyed thinking outside of the box and eating fresher foods and having a more enjoyable, healthy hike because the foods are extremely unhealthy in the United States of America. Um, I found it very nice to have fresh food, sandwiches, and meats and cheese and stuff like that. And if you want to learn more about that, I will put that link to that video up in the top of the screen now. They have weird hours and holidays in Europe. So, generally speaking, a lot of stores are closed on Sundays. And that is pretty much the case in most countries. However, that may change. Some countries are a little bit more religious than others. Um, and if you're in the lazy countries, the Portugal, Italy, Greece, or Spain countries, they do siesta hours where in the mid part of the day, a lot of things aren't open. Bars are always open, but for food, restaurants or stuff like that, sometimes those things weren't open. So you had to be aware of that. You don't want to arrive in a resupply town on a Sunday because the chances are that the market's not going to be open. And every country has its own weird hours and holidays. I especially remember France and Belgium having some really weird holidays and our business hours issues. So do your research before arriving in the town. Make sure things are open. At the huts, not all the huts are equal. So not all the huts have full amenities. So it can vary depending on how remote they are. So don't think that just because you're going to a hut, you're going to have a hot shower, you're going to have electricity, you're going to have, Wi-Fi and all that stuff. Some of these huts are so remote that they have to helicopter these things in. And so they don't have, Wi-Fi or they don't have hot water because it's based on solar. So don't expect to have all the amenities that you're going to have at, say, one place, you're going to have at the next, okay? Um, in conjunction with the huts, just because you're passing through a hut does not mean it's okay to charge your gear or to have food on their terrace or anything like that. Some huts have a lot of very strict rules. Austria for sure had those, and Switzerland had those as well. There was no picnicking, which meant you can't bring your own food and have those pieces of food at their property. You had to pay. There was a picnicking fee. So be sure to ask at the huts if it's okay that you charge your gear, because some may charge you to charge your gear because they only have solar power. So just be friendly and talk to them. Communication is the key to life. While you're in at the huts, you might as well go ahead and ask them about water updates and trail conditions as you progress through the trail. They're going to have the most up-to-date information that you're going to be able to find. None of the applications that you use for hiking trails are similar to Far Out, and so they don't have comments or updates on water and trail conditions. So asking the people that work at the huts is going to be your best resource for up-to-date information about the trails, trail conditions, and water to be expected on trail. That leads me into my next topic, which is GPS. I had a hard time finding a good GPS for Europe that works similar to Far Out does in the United States and on trail systems. So the recommended apps that people use in Europe is Komoot, Komoot, or Hiker with two I's, Hiiker. And we used both of those on my hike in the Via Alpina, and I found both of those to be very unhelpful. They were not that good of apps. So what I used in conjunction with Hiker was Maps.me. Now I've been using Maps.me for a very long time, and I stand by it. It is an offline map that shows you huts, restaurants, markets, market hours. It shows you bus stops. It has a lot of information, more information than any other Maps app that I've been able to come across. So Maps.me was something that I used on the whole trail in conjunction with Hiker. The last topic that I want to talk about is history. There are way more history points of interest on trails in Europe than you will ever find in the United States of America. And if you're a history buff, This is awesome. A lot of the huts have been repurposed into sleeping accommodations, and they used to be military buildings of some sorts. So it's really incredible to walk through history, so to speak. If you've made it this far in the video, this is your chance to hit that like, follow, subscribe, turn on your notifications, share with a friend. I greatly appreciate it, guys. I'm on the road to 2,000 subscribers, so every subscriber counts. If you want to see more videos like this, please turn on your notifications. It's the best way to get notified. I will be doing a lot more videos on European hiking and also Asian hiking and African hiking. So if that's stuff that interests you, please subscribe, guys. This is Cav saying keep calm and hike on, guys. Peace.